Hi, my name is Nicole. Welcome to my channel, Travel to Money. In this video, I will tell you how I used the downtime of the pandemic to shift my financial future and how I've used it to launch my FIRE journey. If you are new here, I have created this channel to help you learn about how to travel, adventure, and have fun on the road to financial independence. I have traveled the world both solo and duo. I paid off a house in Spain, plus I have worked smarter and harder to help me move toward financial independence. I believe that the road to financial freedom can and should be fun. I hope that you'll subscribe and join me on this journey no matter where you are starting from. In 2017, I set off on my first long-term trip around Europe. I had bought a house in the US and was renting it on Airbnb, and also have the benefit of working for an amazing organization where I am also able to work remotely. In 2018, I bought a house in Spain and turned it into my second Airbnb experience. In 2019, I set off on a world travel adventure with my best friend, then traveling duo for the first time. I knew at this point in my life that I wanted travel to be a regular thing. I wanted it to be my normal. At this point in my story, I knew about the FIRE movement and I was really fascinated by it, but I wasn't fully committed. For anyone who doesn't know, FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. I had been busy trying all these new things to try to make more money, from selling used stuff online, to driving Uber, to renting a house on Airbnb, to doing extra graphic and web design projects, and all sorts of other things. But to me, those pieces of income were, more than anything else, simply a means to travel and to be involved in new things. After all, I am an ENFP and an Enneagram 7, and we just can't get enough of new adventures. After traveling for most of 2019, I came back to the US for the first 3 months of 2020. I was initially coming back for meetings and spending time with friends and family. I had to be out of Europe for 90 days, so I was just working online and catching up with different friends. Some of you might remember a second job I mentioned in a video before. I had worked for a golf academy for about 5 months just before my travel in 2019. So I'm sitting in Tennessee visiting a friend when I decide to call the HR director of that job back in Florida to get my tax papers from the previous year. He asked me if I could possibly come back temporarily, part-time or full-time. I told him no because I was leaving the US in just 3 weeks. He said, "How about just the next 10 days? I thought I might as well. My car had just been in the shop with a $1,000 invoice to fix it, so I figured this would at least cover the cost of my car repair. So I did the work for 10 days. I went to the HR director again and said, "I can work the next 2 weeks until I leave if you want me to." He agreed that it would be a help to them. Those next 2 weeks would be pivotal for the world as the news and the spread of COVID-19 really began. I remember sitting at dinner with my boss from the golf academy. She said, "I don't think you're going to Spain." I said, "Yes, I am." Little did I know that I wouldn't have any say in the matter. A week later, my flight was canceled. Of course, none of us knew at this time that it would be over a year before we would be able to go almost anywhere. It has been almost 2 years now, and still the restrictions on travel are changing daily in order to keep COVID at bay. I think it is important to acknowledge that we have all had levels of trauma to deal with as a result of the pandemic. I have a lot to be grateful for, and yet I understand that many parts of this have been hard for me mentally and emotionally. Still, I know of so many stories where I can't even imagine the trauma and grief that some people have gone through. I also want to acknowledge you and your story. Whatever it is, it matters. You may have a lot to be grateful for also, but the things that have been hard for you throughout the pandemic can be acknowledged as well, even when you know that someone else may have had it worse. I won't drone on about COVID. We all know what it has been. What I do want to talk about is the silver lining of this time for me and how I have used it to hyper-focus on the fire portion of my journey. When I turned 40 a couple of years ago, it was the first time I sat back for a minute to consider retirement, and that I had done a very poor job of planning to this point. I had a bit of debt and just $5,000 or $6,000 sitting in a mutual fund that had been transferred over from a pension that I received from a previous employer. I also had $5,000 or $6,000 in my 401k, but at the time I was only putting in 2% of my salary because my employer offered a 2% match. It's true that it is better than nothing, but I was never going to be able to retire on that, and certainly would not be able to retire early. I was facing the realization that I couldn't travel. I was watching so many other people begin to face losing employment, not to mention the fact that I had already stayed with friends for a few months and I didn't have my own place in the US. There was no way to know how long I would be stepping away from traveling. Because I had been helping out at the second job and had housing provided on the campus, I started to do the math to see what it would look like if I kept this second full-time job. It would solve the dilemma of housing while I wasn't traveling. But what if I really focused on my debt? That was my first question. Could I pay off my debt, including my house in Spain? I did the math. I had 2 full-time salaries and almost no living expenses except for car insurance and phone, and all of my meals were provided through my second job. I realized that it would take just over 6 months to pay off every bit of debt I had. I was emotionally a bit overwhelmed by what was going on in the world, but now I had a target and it was time to roll up my sleeves. The work environment at my second job was not the healthiest at the time, and that definitely took a mental toll on me. But I had a goal, and I was seeing my debt reduced in massive chunks every month. It's what kept me going. This is something I think could be really helpful for those who are maybe afraid to look at their finances because the mountain of debt just seems to be so big. I read an Instagram post from Chris the Money Mom, and I really sat with it for a minute. It said, I don't know if this will resonate with anyone else, but the biggest reason I waited to get my finances in order was fear. I was afraid to look at my accounts, afraid to see what I owed, afraid of the poor decisions I made, afraid of what people might think. I sat there and pondered that post for a few minutes. At this point, I was looking back and was already debt-free and was already packing away investments. But I looked back at the me from just a few years ago, and I realized that what she posted was right. I had been afraid to look at my own mistakes. The mountain had seemed too large. Fear had kept me from taking a hard look at money. And it wasn't that my debt seemed impossible to pay off, but at the rate I was going, it seemed like it would take years. So when I read her post, not only did I look back and realize my own fears, but I realized that the people I want to help the most are people who have those same fears. I want to help you find the courage to look at your finances, and then let's find creative ways to overcome your debt and build your financial freedom journey. For me, one of the main reasons I was able to overcome that fear was finding a fast-track plan. No, I'm not talking about get-rich-quick stuff or anything that is easy, but working 2 full-time jobs, not to mention the other side hustles, would mean that I could be debt-free in just over 6 months of time. What would take me 5 years under normal circumstances could be reduced to less than half a year. Suddenly, the light at the end of the tunnel was getting brighter a lot faster. It would have been hard to make that decision without COVID. There were so many places I wanted to travel to, and I love to be on the move. But since I couldn't travel, this COVID curveball gave me the courage to make a decision that I might not have made otherwise. It did take me a little longer than 6 months, but before the end of 2020, I was debt-free. and that was only the beginning. Then I was able to make major investment changes and start to build a financially free future. Just 1 year later, and my net worth is well over $100,000, I'm in the process of buying 2 more houses in Spain, and I'm using the uncertain time of COVID to roll up my sleeves and work harder than I've ever worked in my life. 2 full-time jobs, a YouTube channel where I'm ultimately building a business, and various side hustles. Yes, in general, life needs balance. My day-to-day over the last couple of years might not sound very balanced, but I believe for a season this is okay. This is what I call a jumpstart, and I would encourage you to consider whether or not a jumpstart of intense focus might help you to get started and to keep going. In the next video, I'll tell you about how I've arranged my investments over the last year now that I have bigger chunks of money to invest. I would appreciate it so much if you would hit that like button, and even better if you would subscribe to join me on this journey where travel and adventure build financial freedom. I can't wait to see where your dreams will take you.